Good Wednesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for March the 22nd. Today we are reading together called an audible, so forgive me for that. I know it's not football season yet, but I am calling it audible. I wanted to go ahead and combine chapters 9 and 10 together because I'll be honest, growing up, I've heard the story of Nadab and Abihu, or Nadab and Abihu, however you want to say it. I'll probably say it both ways throughout this video, but I've heard this story before. And I don't think I ever realized the kind of the setting in which this story took place here, basically in the very beginning of the instituted worship through the Levitical priest system. This story seems to happen right here at the beginning. And I think that's really important for us to be able to frame this story in the proper light and to understand what takes place here in Leviticus chapter 10. So I wanted to combine these two chapters, and they're both short chapters. Anyways, I think like 24 and 22 verses or something, like 20 verses. So we're looking at a little over 40 verses combined. And for the most part, that's a single chapter for a lot of the chapters that we've been reading. So I just want to read both of these together, go through the details, and consider some things from this text that are very important for us to understand, again, in order to frame this probably familiar story to us of Nadab and Abihu. So let's read together here in Leviticus chapter 9 and verse number 1. Again, we're reading both Leviticus 9 and Leviticus 10 for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hope that you've had a great start to the week, and we're ready to keep it rolling with some good daily Bible readings, and especially for our Bible study tonight at 7 p.m. Before we get there, let's do our reading here in Leviticus 9 and Leviticus 10. Leviticus chapter 9, verse number 1. On the 8th day, Moses summoned Aaron, his sons, and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, take a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, both without blemish, and present them before Yahweh. And tell the Israelites, take a male goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, male yearlings without blemish for a burnt offering, an ox and a ram for a fellowship offering to sacrifice before Yahweh, and a grain offering mixed with oil. For today, Yahweh is going to appear to you. A very exciting day, certainly for the people, God's presence coming to be before them. Verse number 5 of Leviticus chapter 9. They brought what Moses had commanded to the front of the tent of meeting, and the whole community came forward and stood before Yahweh. Moses said, this is what Yahweh commanded you to do, that the glory of Yahweh may appear to you. Then Moses said to Aaron, approach the altar and sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering, make atonement for yourself and the people, sacrifice the people's offering and make atonement for them as Yahweh commanded. So Aaron approached the altar and slaughtered the calf as a sin offering for himself. Aaron's sons brought the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in the blood and applied it to the horns of the altar. He poured out the blood at the base of the altar. He burned the fat and the kidneys and the fatty lobe of the liver from the sin offering on the altar, as Yahweh had commanded Moses. He burned the flesh and the hide outside the camp. Then he slaughtered the burnt offering. Aaron's sons brought him the blood, and he splattered it on all sides of the altar. They brought him the burnt offering piece by piece, along with the head, and he burned them on the altar. He washed the entrails and the legs, and burned them with the burnt offering on the altar. Aaron presented the people's offering. He took the male goat for the people's sin offering, slaughtered it, and it made a sin offering with it as he did before. He presented the burnt offering and sacrificed it according to the regulation. Next, he presented the grain offering, took a handful of it, and burned it on the altar in addition to the morning burnt offering. Finally, he slaughtered the ox and the ram as the people's fellowship sacrifice. Aaron's sons brought him the blood, and he splattered it on all sides of the altar. They also brought the fat portions from the ox and the ram, the fat tail, the fat surrounding the entrails, the kidneys, and the fatty lobe of the liver, and placed these on the breasts. Aaron burned the fat portions on the altar, but he presented the breast and the right thigh as a presentation offering before the Lord, before Yahweh, as Moses had commanded. Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them, and he came down after sacrificing the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the fellowship offering. Moses and Aaron then entered the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the people. Fire came down from Yahweh and consumed the burnt offering and the fat portions on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell face down. Chapter 10, Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu each took his own fire pan, put fire in it, and placed incense on it, and presented unauthorized fire before Yahweh, which he had not commanded them to do. Then fire came from Yahweh and consumed them, and they died before Yahweh. Moses said to Aaron, "This is what Yahweh has spoken. I will demonstrate my holiness to those who are near me, and I will reveal my glory before all the people." And Aaron remained silent. Moses summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle Uziel, and said to them, "Come here and carry your relatives away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp." So they came forward and carried them in their tunics outside the camp, as Moses had said. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not let your hair hang loose, and do not tear your clothes, or else you will die, and Yahweh will become angry with the whole community. However, your brothers, the whole house of Israel, may weep over the fire that Yahweh caused. You must not go outside the entrance to the tent of meeting, or you will die, for Yahweh's anointing oil is on you." They did as Moses said. Yahweh spoke to Aaron, "You and your sons are not to drink wine or beer when you enter the tent of meeting, or else you will die. This is a permanent statute throughout your generations. You must distinguish between the holy and the common, and the clean and the unclean, and teach the Israelites all the statutes that Yahweh has given to them through Moses." Moses spoke to Aaron and his remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Take the grain offering that is left over from the food offerings to Yahweh and eat it, prepared without yeast beside the altar, because it is especially holy. You must eat it in a holy place, because it is your portion, and your sons from the food offerings to Yahweh, for this is what I was commanded. But you and your sons and your daughters may eat the breast of the presentation offering and the thigh of the contribution in any ceremonially clean place, because these portions have been assigned to you and your children from the Israelites' fellowship sacrifices. They are to bring the thigh of the contribution and the breast of the presentation offering, together with the food offerings of the fat portions, to present as a presentation offering before Yahweh. It will permanently belong to you and your children, as Yahweh commanded." Then Moses inquired carefully about the male goat of the sin offering, but it had already been burned up. He was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's surviving sons, and asked, "Why didn't you eat the sin offering in the sanctuary area? For it is especially holy, and he has assigned it to you to take away the guilt of the community and make atonement for them before Yahweh. Since his blood was not brought inside the sanctuary, you should have eaten it in the sanctuary area as I commanded." But Aaron replied to Moses, "See, today they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before Yahweh. Since these things have happened to me, if I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been accepted in Yahweh's sight?" When Moses heard this, it was acceptable to him. And that is Exodus chapter 9 and Exodus chapter 10. Get this highlighted real fast. Miss this highlight. All righty, let's consider this text here for a few minutes. All right, so looking at these two chapters in, again, this is the beginning of the worship under the Levitical system of the priest and their sacrifices and such that they were to offer up on behalf of the people. So as we get here, get to the beginning of the chapter that we see in the first 6 verses, the command to carry out the sin and fellowship offering. And this was to be done in association with bringing the people from the camp now into a place where Yahweh's presence is going to be experienced. Looking at this text, we see at the very end of chapter 9 that Yahweh's presence is there and is seen in a very impressive way. But it's spoken about previously. There's a number of times, I think 2 times, if I remember correctly, where it is said that Yahweh is going to appear before you today. We see that in verse number 4. I believe we see it again later on in the text. Let's see if I see it real fast. pretty sure we read it at least a second time, but we do see it this first time here, and possibly a second time. There it is, verse number 6. This is what Yahweh commanded you to do, that the glory of Yahweh may appear to you. So in order for Yahweh's presence to appear before the people, there needs to be this cleansing, there needs to be this purification, they need to be this consecration on behalf of the people as well. So verses 7 through 21 speak about Aaron carrying out the commanded sacrifices that need to be made. First, in verses 7 through 14, he makes a sin offering for himself. And then in verses 15 through 21, he carries out a grain and fellowship and presentation offering, seemingly on behalf of the people. So he's moving the people then from a place of sin and separation, where they are unclean, to now being in a condition of where they have been atoned and where they have been purified. And all of this was done by blood. So with this taking place then, picking up in verse 22, Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them. He came down after sacrificing the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the fellowship offering. Moses and Aaron entered the tent of meeting. So they're in there, and then they come out, and it says they bless the people again. So what is the deal with this blessing of the people? I have a note here from one of my resources that I think did a good job of summarizing what it meant to be blessed by God. And the man, his last name Ross, said the word blessing carries the basic idea of enrichment, endowment, or gift. It refers to any enrichment that one gives another, any kind of gift. When the word is used for blessing God's people or for God blessing people, it signifies that he enriches them physically, materially, emotionally, and of course spiritually. And that blessing, that endowment often includes the ability to do what God has instructed or promised. The full blessing of God may not always be realized at once, perhaps not even in this life. Sometimes the answers to prayers and the rewards of spiritual investments are delayed. The immediate enrichment we enjoy is the satisfaction of serving, whereas the bounty from God might be fully realized only in the life to come. So here, as he's blessing the people, surely the idea behind what he's doing is he is speaking to them concerning the benefit of being in God's presence, and the fact that moving forward, that God, in being in their presence, they would be able to accomplish what it was that he was leading them to accomplish, that with his blessing, with his presence, they would be able to enter the promised land as he desired for them to do, again, in fulfilling his promise to Abraham. Now, the seal of approval for Aaron and Moses and the people is the fact that the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the people. And I don't know if I don't remember studying this, or if I never made the connection before, but it is so interesting that right before the scenario with Nadab and Abihu, that we have again fire coming from Yahweh and consuming the burnt offering and the portions on the altar. We have this happen, and in this instance, it is a sign of approval. It is a sign that Yahweh is pleased with what the people have done. But when the people saw it, they shouted and fell face down. So they now are convinced of God's presence. But as we turn the chapter, which again, just because there's a new chapter does not mean there's a new scene. I firmly believe that it seems that this is all taking place in the same scene. This is all taking place right now. That even though God's presence was with them, they're going to be taught now that you cannot take that presence lightly and think that everything is good to go, that there's no need now to follow the commands of Yahweh, because Yahweh in the law of Moses and in the Levitical system was very stringent with his commands and expected them to be followed. He was very detailed in his commands and expected them to be followed. So whenever we turn around then in chapter 10 and see that Nadab and Abihu take their fire pins and they put fire in it and they place incense in it, the text says that they presented, the CSB says they presented unauthorized fire before Yahweh, which he had not commanded them to do. Unauthorized fire before Yahweh, which he had not commanded them to do. So what exactly is this unauthorized fire? Really, the there's not much detail that tells us exactly what it was. Maybe it was as simple as they got the fire from the wrong place. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe they did not get it from one of the two altars within the bronze altar in the courtyard, or the altar that was within the holy place. Maybe that's what it was. Some have suggested that maybe the fire here was associated with some kind of pagan practice. Others have suggested maybe they took this fire into the most holy place, a place that they were not authorized to be in. And that was the issue. Some have even said that maybe the issue here, because of the instructions that Moses is about to give concerning alcohol, that maybe they were drunk in what they did. Again, the details simply are not there. What we are given plainly is that this was unauthorized fire before Yahweh, again, either from either the wrong fire or the wrong fire in the wrong place, whatever it was. It was not what they commanded them to do. In the exact same fire, it seems, or type of fire that had just came to show approval for them and what they are doing, is now going to be given and showing them that he is not pleased. Yahweh is not pleased with what is being done. The fire consumed them and they died before Yahweh. So here we go. How fast do we go from such an enjoyable celebratory scene to now being a scene of shock and awe and sadness? I mean, I cannot imagine if this is the same scene. Again, it seems to be the same scene to me. It seems to be this is all within sequence. I can't imagine going from the high of high to now this low of low. How just shocking that must have been. But why? Why do Yahweh do this? Because this is not the only time that people were going to mess up in regards to carrying out various commands. In fact, there was going to be a number of times whenever these commands just weren't carried out at all. And yet in all those instances, people were not killed. It seems to me that this was necessary to set the tone for the priesthood, to set the tone for carrying out the commands of Yahweh. If this is in the very first scene of Levitical priesthood worship, then for them to make this mistake, whatever that mistake was, whatever it must have been that was so serious, here is Yahweh saying, you need to straighten up. You need to take seriously what I am commanding you. I will demonstrate my holiness to those who are near me, and I will reveal my glory before all people. Notice that Aaron's own family, at least the immediate family, the priesthood, they were not allowed to take care of the bodies, but he had some I guess cousins, Mishael and Elzaphan, that were to come and take out the bodies, and they came and carried them in their tunics. They did not even want to touch these dead bodies themselves for risk of being unclean. And then Moses says, "Hey, you are not going to mourn right now. You're not going to let your hair down. You're not going to tear your clothes. We'll let other people do that. You have a duty to do. You have a responsibility to carry out here in this moment. You can mourn for this later if need be." And then verses 8, 9, 10, 11 talk about this prohibition against wine and beer and just alcohol whenever it came to them carrying out their priestly duties. Later on in the history of Israel, the priesthood being drunkards is going to be a big deal. In Isaiah 28, verse number 7, specifically, this thing is mentioned. So whenever it came to them performing their priestly duties, they were not allowed to partake in any alcohol whatsoever, no matter the amounts. It just was not something they were allowed to do. And the reason for that seems to be very clear, because you must distinguish between the holy and the common, the clean and the unclean. This is why some people think that maybe alcohol was involved with what happened with Nadab and Abihu, that they had been inebriated and had offered this strange fire because of their inebriation. It's certainly plausible. I don't know with certainty. And then the chapter finishes out by Moses just talking to Aaron and his family about the demand to treat their privileges and responsibilities as holy. Gives them more instructions concerning what they needed to do. But then verse 16, Moses inquired carefully about the male goat of the sin offering. It had already been burned up. It had not been eaten as it should have been, at least as it was designed to be eaten by Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's surviving sons. And he questions them, why didn't you do this? Well, Aaron replies in verse number 19. He said, see, today they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before Yahweh. But since these things have happened to me, if I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been acceptable in Yahweh's sight? So it seems that Aaron's mindset is, because of this sin that took place, it would not have been right for us to eat this sacrifice. Where Nadab and Abihu had maybe been careless in their carrying out of the dictates of Yahweh in regard to the Levitical system, it seems that Aaron was being entirely cautious here, given what had taken place, and therefore did not feel comfortable eating, considering the circumstances. And Moses, being the covenant mediator, agrees with him. He heard this and this was acceptable to him. We're given no indication at all that this was not something, or that this was something that was displeasing to God here in this moment. Maybe there was appreciation for the very purposeful consideration of whether or not this was appropriate for them to do. So that finishes out then chapters 9 and 10. Those who are set aside for service to the holy God must sanctify Yahweh before the people by how they conduct themselves in ministry. A good summary of these two particular texts together. Certainly, we are impressed by the seriousness with which we ought to carry out God's very direct and plain commands. If he makes it plain and direct to us, then we would do well to simply humble ourselves before him and to do as he would have us to do. And that is certainly something that we see here in these two chapters, and we put them together. Hopefully our understanding and framing of this story is a little better than it was before, considering these two chapters together, not just looking at verses 1, 2, and 3, which unfortunately I think has been my experience for the most part. Whenever people talk about Nadab and Abihu, that's what they talk about, just 1, 2, and 3. They don't consider the rest of what goes on around the text, and I think it really does help to shed more light on what's taking place within this text. So with reading 9 and 10 today, that will move everything up a day or so in our reading for the rest of the week. So tomorrow 11, and then on Friday 12 and 13, and Saturday we'll read chapter 14. And I'll just continue to update the readings on our slides before our reading together, and then also I will make sure to get out the next 3 months worth of readings. I'll get those printouts put up at the church here in the near future. I appreciate so much you tuning into this reading on this Wednesday. If you have any questions or comments, as always, please feel free to leave those in the comments section. I appreciate you taking the time to read along with me today. Looking forward to seeing everyone tonight as we gather together for our Bible studies at 7 p.m. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone. We'll see you here in a little bit. Take care. God bless.